Good afternoon, all. Can people hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
So welcome everybody. Sorry for my 2-minute delay tuning into Zoom. As you all know, this is the special private meeting set up by John O'Connor under the title "Keeping the Virus Behind the Mask," specifically for us, who organised by John O'Connor, who's been working relentlessly over the last month on the Working for Masks for All Malawi campaign. I'm Bartholomew Ryan. For those of you who don't know, I'm speaking to you from Lisbon. I work up at the Universidade Nova de Lisboa as a philosophy professor and researcher there. So the topic today, just to get straight to the point, because I know some of you don't have so much time and we're coming from very many different places, from Mexico to Malawi, of course, and different various places across the world. So we'll try to finish this this meeting together by 2 o'clock. If it finishes before, so be it as well. Could go on because some of us have to go at that time. We will have 4 to 5 speakers, each talking, I guess, around 5 minutes if they can. And really, it's to generate focus. Focus is the word for today. A strategy for focus of the use of the mask. Remember, the use of the mask during this pandemic as part of the overall comprehensive solution. So the forum today is a chance for us really to put our heads together and to share some vital information and exchange ideas and strategies and spreading awareness, attention, and generate focus in the use of the mask during this pandemic. Before I go on to introduce the first speaker, and I have, so I'll try to move quite fast. I would just say a few words. I guess it's significant, and of course I'm really the prelude to the experts, the concrete experts, in this meeting, as I'm much more in the humanities. But I will just say it's significant this day and this time, at least in Portugal. On one hand, it's the 25th of April, and this is a very special day in Portugal, for those who don't know, and in Italy, and in some of the countries in Africa, such as Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, former colonies of the Portuguese Empire. It was on this day in 1974 that it ended the dictatorship that nearly went on for 50 years in Portugal. And it's a very special day, and it's probably the first time since 1974 that people are not going to be on the streets, not celebrating, and it signifies a liberation. So that's something to think about. And also, of course, only last week that Passover was celebrated in the Jewish calendar, which is also quite significant in that it's celebrating really a survival of a pandemic, the 10 plagues that the Old Testament God unleashed on the Egyptians in order for the pharaohs to liberate the Israelites from slavery. So while the Jewish people stayed indoors, marking their homes with lamb's blood, according to the Exodus 12:13, so that the angel of death would literally pass over the houses and they would not die. And then yesterday, Ramadan began, observed by Muslims worldwide as a month of fasting, prayer, reflection, and community. So it's a commemoration there of Muhammad's first revelation. So we have these 3 interwoven events happening. And I think these are symbols and practical realities and objectives for today when we think of these 3 events, literally liberation in the positive sense at this crisis moment. And we have to work together, and not in the negative sense and freedom from, but really freedom to do something, freedom to focus for us as a human species. And then discipline, really the focus of discipline. Ramadan really represents that discipline. And thirdly, precaution, literally what happens in Passover, how to survive, and the precautionary measures that are needed to be taken in very precarious times. So they go hand in hand if our humanity and our civilization as a flourishing and empathetic entity is to continue and to survive. So just a few words, literally, pandemics are really part of our human history. They're always emerging and always occurring throughout human time. Remember the definition of pandemic, literally all, it's a Greek word, pan, all, demos, people, so all people. So it's distinctive there from epidemic, which literally epi is upon the people. It can be just in a one particular place, or endemic, which is in the people or it's in the place. But pandemic really is an all-encompassing event. And there have been many pandemics, even in the 20th century. We can think of course, the most lethal pandemic of the 20th century was the Spanish flu, which literally killed 20 to 50 million people. At least half a billion people could have been affected by it. So it's something that's in our culture as a symbol and a reality from in modernity and the ancient world, from the Black Plague to today. It's in our mythology. And a simple solution has been around for a long time, such as using the mask. Of course, again, the mask as an overall comprehensive solution, okay? So it's not advocating masks as a be-all and an end-all, but rather a crucial element in combating, and it is literally combating pandemics, which in this case, of course, is airborne. And masks have been used to great effect in the past, most notably in the early 20th century. An example of this was in the Manchurian plague outbreak in 1910, 1911, and again a few years later. And masks were used and were effective and were very important. So this is something that's been very much present in Asia for at least a century, of using the masks. The mask then can be viewed as, and I quote the anthropologist Christos Linteris, an icon of an agonistic medical rationalism. So literally an icon of an agonistic, the suffering, there's something that's within us, medical rationalism. It's a statement that we are in a pandemic and that we are protecting ourselves and others, especially others, from ourselves. And this is the airborne virus. It's really important to remember that this mask, such a simple thing and something that we need to focus. So I will say a few words about focus and distraction as a bridge between two of the speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to move to the first speaker, introduce the first speaker, Dr. Gama Bandawi, who is in charge of the UMU policy for Malawi and is speaking to us from Malawi. He's the head of Biological Sciences Department, and it's a real privilege and honor to have him here with us today. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. Bandawi.
Thank you so much, Bart. That's a really fantastic opening and a prelude to some of the things that I'm going to say. I'm going to speak briefly about the policy and the thinking behind the policy to kind of lead us into the discussions and the rest of the presentations. I think it's beautifully laid out. I think the little interludes that you give us also on some of the other broader social contexts are really fantastic. I'm of course a medical virologist by training, and so I will just make a few comments on that and talk really about the policy thinking behind or some of the thought process behind the policy that we've promulgated here. So look, COVID is a new disease. I think sometimes you have to kind of stop and remind yourself that we are barely just over 100 days or so into this pandemic. And a lot of things have happened. A modern pandemic is quite different, I think, from previous pandemics. Within time already, we've sequenced the virus in many different regions as well. We've understood many things about it. Of course, we've had the advantage of similar viruses that have come before, other coronaviruses like SARS and the original SARS and MERS. But we've done an incredible job of understanding a lot of the things about that, to the extent that there are vaccine and therapy trials that are underway by the hundreds at the moment. But the one thing that I can tell you is that we're still learning a lot. This virus is teaching us a whole lot of things about many different things about our society. But for me, some of the two important things that I just want to mention is that we're learning a lot about how quickly we can generate information. We're also learning about how we share that information. For example, we're looking at reprints. I've never read so many reprints in my life before, because we understand how important it is to get information out. But we're also learning about the pathogenesis. You know, we're learning new things about how it makes you sick, it thickens the blood. And, you can sometimes, dermatologists have figured out that if you look at the toes, you can see that somebody's infected. But certainly one of the most important things is that we are still learning about the transmission. And the thing about the transmission is that it's really hard to study. You know, you can't set up a blinded trial and infect people. You know, it's the practical side of figuring out how the transmission works is really hard. So there's a lot of theory. There's a lot of kind of theoretical or lab-based work that's gone on, that's trying to inform us. But certainly there's still a lot of gaps in the knowledge. And one of the important gaps, for example, is the idea of a virus being like a poison. In other words, the infectious dose or the amount of virus that you get might have a big role in determining how your disease progression goes. Okay, so cloth masks, when they have been worn by people infected by COVID patients, we know that these can be effective, especially in protecting others around you. Okay, people can actually be most infectious when they've got no signs or symptoms, and asymptomatic spread, I think, with all the experts have said that this is a big problem. We take lessons here from things that happened in HIV, where asymptomatic spread is and remains one of the biggest issues. So mask wearing appears to reduce transmissibility by reducing transmission of these infectious droplets. We do know that. We do know that the transmission is via these infectious droplets. So the idea of universal mask usage by everybody in public is an important part of a comprehensive overall strategy to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And this is not because, like I said, it's not because we have comprehensive data related to the outbreak. You know how difficult that is. But this is on the basis of the precautionary principle. And this is simply the principle that in the absence of all the knowledge, where you still have gaps in the data, you must absolutely take every precaution that you think might be relevant or might be useful in such a setting. And especially in a resource-challenged setting such as ours in Malawi, this principle is all the more key. It's all the more important. And you know, along with all the other interventions that we can look at, so pharmaceuticals, ventilators, etc., all of those things. And given that a lot of those things are less available, the importance of these simple interventions, such as universal mask usage, really can't be emphasized more. So universal mask usage can come in two forms. It can be either voluntary or it can be mandatory. And in the case of voluntary universal mask usage, the country basically advises its citizens to say, look, when you go outside, could you please wear a mask? And Hong Kong is an example of this, where citizens appear to overwhelmingly comply. So you basically rely on the citizens' good nature or goodwill towards others. And this has had a big effect. The number of deaths and cases there has been extremely low if you consider that they're right next to, well, it's part of China, where things have been really bad there as well. And so this differs from mandatory universal mask usage, where you know, the citizens are mandated essentially to wear mask usage, and that's what we are looking at. We know that it's enforced in about 8 different countries. So the evidence is there that countries that have adopted universal mask usage, either soon before or soon after, definitely have much lower incidence and much lower deaths. And I think that I believe that there's an annex that we've shared that looks at those countries where the universal mask usage policy is ambiguous or where it's clear and it's there. And the difference, I think, is quite stark. And so I think the important, so this is the sort of thing that has informed our formulation of the policy. And I think in our discussions, essentially, we feel that it seems irresponsible or profligate to discount the precautionary implementation of universal mask usage, especially given the evidence that is there. A lot of lives, we can be quite sure that in the absence of this, a lot of lives will be lost. I think there's a lot to be said. I think the introduction was really good in terms of the religious context that we're in. I think there's a lot to be said about how that goes towards loving your neighbor, because I think we can debate for a very long time about how protective each type of mask is with respect to acquiring the infection. But I think what's definitely beyond debate here is that if you are asymptomatic and if you are wearing a mask, you are much less likely to transmit. And to me, that is really the epitome of loving your neighbor. And so that, in a nutshell, is essentially the thinking behind the formulation of the universal mask policy that we are advocating for here. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Bandawi. It's very helpful, and I'll move forward to the next speaker without further ado. It's Dr. Mitch Matoga, who will be presenting to us, and Professor and Doctor of Epidemiology, and we'll talk about the COVID, I think, 19 epidemiological situation in Malawi and the approach of the campaign. So please, I welcome, and it's a privilege again to welcome Dr. Mitch Matoga from Malawi.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, everyone. Welcome. So I spoke with John just a couple hours ago when we looked at the agenda for this meeting, and we felt that it wasn't going to be a good idea to just talk about the policy and how we plan to execute without really laying the foundation to talk about what is the COVID situation in Malawi looking like. So I'm going to give you a brief, really brief overview of the COVID situation in Malawi, and basically how our health system is responding to the COVID situation. I'm just going to share my screen because I prepared a few slides. Just give me a couple of minutes. And let me know if you're able to see my screen. Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Okay, let me try and do that again. All right, and I'm going to keep my video off because I'm trying to improve connectivity.
Now we can, yes.
Now you can, thank you. Great. All right, so briefly, in Africa, as of yesterday, we had confirmed cases of COVID amounting to 27,876, and 1,300 deaths, and about 8,300 or so that have recovered so far. But as you can see, largely it's the northern part of Africa, so North Africa and South Africa, that are worst hit at the moment. But you can also argue to say that these are the countries that also have the economic muscle to be able to do testing and in large numbers. So this is how the epidemic is looking right now, with about 4,000 cases, I think, in Egypt, Algeria, and South Africa. Those are the countries that are leading right now. I want to quickly show you this table here. It's a model that folks from the Imperial College of Epidemiology in the UK came up with, and basically they did a model to show how the COVID pandemic would unveil in Africa, with situation A being unmitigated or unabated, if it was left to just spread and have its natural course or natural flow within the continent of Africa, would pretty much have almost all the people in Africa infected. That's about 1.2 billion people, and the population of Africa is about 1.2 billion, and or so. So it's close to about 98% of Africans that would actually be infected if we were to leave COVID unabated or unmitigated, and would have about 3.3 million deaths. But then with interventions such as B, which is moderate social distancing, and C, which is intensive social distancing, we can actually reduce the number of cases and also reduce the number of deaths, as you can see in the table. However, in Africa, we have a problem with the way that people live in terms of population densities, as well as distribution of populations. As you can see, that most of the countries in Africa actually have people living in slums, and this makes it very, very difficult to implement this, preventive interventions such as social distancing, moderate or even intense social distancing, in places where you have a lot of slums. And even the simplest prevention method available so far, which is hand washing, even that in Africa is a problem. As you can see, about a third of Africans actually have access to hand washing facilities in their households. So COVID has a potential to really spread and affect a lot of people in Africa, given our current circumstances. So quickly moving on to Malawi. Malawi has a population of about 19 or 18 million, and 85% of the population in Malawi are actually living in rural areas, with a very high population density of about 130 to 203 people per square kilometer. So again, this gives us a context as to if we're going to implement, preventive interventions, how best can we do it in this sort of in this type of setting? And half of the population in Malawi actually live below the poverty line. So again, these are all the questions or all the issues that we have to be thinking about when we think about how best can we prevent COVID transmission in Malawi. Moving on, a team called the Kuunika Data for in Malawi, in collaboration with, I think, folks from the University of Maryland in the USA, did a mathematical model to sort of show how COVID transmission would be in Malawi and how it would have impact on the nation. But this model was done on the 31st of March, or released on the 31st of March. And this was way before we started registering any cases, because I think we registered the first case of COVID on the 2nd of April. So the assumptions that they used in the model were based on lessons learned from other countries, especially neighboring countries. But this is what they came up with. In their model, they found that about 85%, which is 60 million people, or 60 million Malawians, would actually become infected over a year. Yeah, and would have about 500,000 people who would need hospitalization and 85,000 people who would need critical care. And then of those admitted who would need critical care, about 50,000 would die. So this is how they sort of estimated how COVID would transmit and how much of an impact it would have on Malawians. And I did actually put a slide on distribution by districts, but in that graph they actually showed that Lilongwe, and which is the capital city, and the big cities in Malawi like Blantyre, Zomba, and Zuzu would actually be greatly affected, with about 90% of the people in those areas being affected. So as of yesterday, Malawi had 33 confirmed cases of COVID, with 26 being active, 4 that have recovered, and 3 deaths so far. However, there's a lot of debate already out there around the accuracy of these numbers based on our abilities to actually test. We believe that the cases that are being reported here as confirmed are actually underreported because of our lack of our ability to actually test people, find the index cases, follow up their contacts, and test in large numbers. As you can see, since the 2nd of April, when we registered the first case, we've been able to test 566 people. And this is how the progression is looking so far. Starting from around about the 2nd of April, we have slowly been seeing a sharp rise of cases of COVID in the country. And this is the picture that we actually continue to see as time goes by. Again, just looking at the same on a different perspective, you can see that also as we ramp up testing in the country, because we're trying to do as much as possible to make sure that we are able to test more people, we're able to actually identify more people. So as of yesterday alone, on the 24th of April, like 10 new cases were registered. So you can see how COVID is really spreading rapidly in Malawi as well. In terms of deaths, we're also seeing a rise in the number of deaths. And we also expect that with a rise in the number of cases, we're also going to see a rise in the number of deaths as well. But this is how the situation looks so far. So in terms of testing in Malawi, we only have 4 testing sites at the moment. One site in the northern region, which was announced, I think, last week. I don't know if it's fully functional yet. Two sites in the southern region of Malawi, and then 1 site in the central region of Malawi in Lilongwe. So as you can see that these 3 testing sites are actually our big cities in Malawi. So testing at the moment is only available in big cities, and there's only 4 sites across the whole country. This is 4 sites against 19 million people. And as you can see, none of these are actually anywhere near our main borders. We have our main border up north here in Karonga, bordering Tanzania. We've got another main border here with Zambia, and we've got another main border here with Mozambique. So people who are potentially infected, and what we've seen actually is that it's people who are coming into Malawi from countries that actually have high numbers of COVID, and they're bringing in COVID into Malawi and spreading it into Malawi. But then these people are scattered all over the country, but then testing is only available in the major cities. So it's a long chain for someone who's in a remote district to actually be able to get a test in Malawi. Chances are that they'll get sick and probably die, and that case will not be registered as a COVID case or death. The testing platform right now and procedures are as follows. We are using an antibody test, which is an immunoglobulin M and G test, as the first test to look for antibodies to see if somebody has antibodies against COVID, and that would be more or less like a proxy to them having been infected or having an active infection. But then for us to confirm an active infection, once somebody tests reactive on this antibody test, we're then collecting a sample and then sending it to the testing sites where they're doing a PCR to confirm active infection. And so far in Malawi, we have about 17 ventilators, against a population of 19 million people. So you can imagine that if we have, based on the Kuunika model, about 85,000 people that need critical care, there's no way we'll be able to support those people. As we roll out universal mask usage in Malawi, WHO really advocates for collecting data to substantiate the effect of universal mask usage in prevention of COVID transmission. So this is one thing that we will definitely need to do when we start distributing masks in Malawi. We'll definitely need to collect data and do some sort of analysis to show whether or not universal mask usage actually is impacting on transmission. That's all that I had for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matoga. I was on mute button there. And we'll move on swiftly then to our third speaker, who is Dr. Omar Macera, Professor of Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, Energy and Resources, who actually received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 as a member of the IPPC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So over to you, Dr. Macera. Thank you.
Hi, hello everybody. I'm not using my camera because my internet connection is not so good. So this is just to say hello to everybody. But maybe the best thing is to keep it without the video. So well, many thanks. Well, I'm as you said, professor at the National University of Mexico. And just to give you a brief introduction about what is happening in Mexico, we have about 15,000 cases, confirmed cases, but even the government estimates that at least there are 10 times more cases. So we're about 150, and there's has been 1,300 deaths already. The country, the government announced the starting of what we call here phase 3. That means the phase where the number of cases is expected to increase even more rapidly, and the pandemic is expected to get the peak in Mexico in about two weeks from now. The situation so far regarding in particular the masks, okay, in general is not is focused, so the cases are focused in specific places. So even if let's say there are cases all over the country, but there are clearly regions that where the situation is worse. But regarding the mask use, well, I think the government followed the WHO guidelines mostly at the beginning, and so the masks were not promoted for the general public. But now that we are entering the phase 3, masks have been are mandatory. No, they are not enforced by the police, etc. But the government has the policy now is that they are. If you go out of your house, you have to wear a public mask. And so, well, this is the situation. Compliance with the rules has been good in some places, but in general, I think for the general public, in particular for low income neighborhoods and people that really need on the informal markets, informal economy, and enforcing this social distancing and now the masks, but particularly social distancing is kind of has been difficult. So we don't know very well how the situation will evolve. The good thing is that the government has been an unified direction, no, and policy, and I think they have been doing many things to prevent. So regarding the beds needed, the ventilators, there's now a project to produce quickly ventilators in Mexico, made easy to do and cheap ventilators and all this and other things. So at least in that sense, the situation is not that bad, but we don't know what is going to happen because, as I said, now we are getting to the peak, to the really most the 2 or 3 coming weeks are going to be critical. So coming to what I've been really doing most, that is climate change, research on climate change, but also on public health, because I work basically with John and Connor on these alternatives for these 3 billion people that still cook with open fires, and it's a health problem, and so I've been working a lot on public health. So I will talk briefly about the denial, no? Denial of a situation, and in particularly regarding climate change, I would say, and the things that I will talk about this because there are parallels that could be useful in order to see how can we act and how can we most effectively act in the case of the COVID. Obviously, there are many differences as well. So in terms of climate change, well, we have seen clearly, at least there are two different kinds of denial. There's one denial, like I think the type of Donald Trump denial, that another governments that are clearly based on political interests, no? And basically, I think the denial is because the actions needed to cope with climate change are challenging status quo, oil industry, and many things that are deeply rooted in the current political order. So I think that's one part of the problem, but I will not talk about that. But the second one, I think that probably is the most important, or well, not important, but interesting in this case, is I would say that the sociological part of the denial, no? And I think this regards, independently of the country or in general, it regards in terms of climate change with the thing that you are communicating or trying to communicate, something that is really bad news for the people that will have, that will need to them to adjust, to make important changes in their way of living, but also where consequences are still in the future. Particularly climate change is something that, you know, in many places you don't do. It's not so clear for people that they are witnessing the consequences, but you really need to act now and quickly and effectively before it is critical. When you are witnessing the problem, when you are suffering, then it's too late. And I think in that case, there's a good parallelism with what is happening with the COVID, because you really only, I think, people tend to act when the things are so clear. No, you have a dead person in front of you or things like that, and in this case, we need to prevention. No, prevention, precautionary action, etc., is essential, but it's not easy to mobilize. So this has been challenging. And the third issue that we working on climate change, that we I don't say, shouldn't say discover, but something that has been happening with the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, where I have been working for many years, is that scientific information per se, providing scientific information, is not enough to mobilize people. Really, it's very difficult to make that situation changes just based on access to scientific information. So, for example, things that we have been that have made the difference in different countries is, for example, okay, you're providing information at the scientific level, but the government policy doesn't align with the message or challenges the message. So you need to be clear that if there are different actors saying different things, that complicates a lot what you are trying to achieve. So alignment of the key actors with the same message is essential. No? The second is that because there's uncertainty, and I think to some extent this is happening also with the COVID, less obviously than with climate change, but uncertainty is presented as equal possible outcomes, no, of different things. So it's equally, the possibility of not that this situation that climate change is just an invention, almost the same weight as the other situation, no, or the consequences of, if you will have floods, or you will not have, etc. So people tend to value this information in the same and balance them, instead of really understanding that not it's not the same, and there are always opinions and things that do not there's a mainstream and there are others, but it's not clear for many people what to do with this when the information, particularly in the media, is presented as, oh, okay, there are different points of view, no? And the last one, and it's been really terrible in Mexico now, I don't know, probably that has to do more with the people that has access to internet, etc. But this is the thing of fake news, no? News that are presented, I think in some cases on purpose to really destroy the position or to make people do not following the rules or these policies. And that what happens is that really makes very difficult then again, no, to assess who is telling really the truth. And the last thing, I don't know if that's the case with Malawi, but here in Mexico is that there is a government in general is not trusted, no, 100%, because there have been so many events in the past, no, with corruption and other things that many times before really believing what, particularly when you are telling people to do, like I said, no, big changes in their life or in their in the way they are living, then it's not easy to mobilize, and people tend to think that there are other interests and they are being asked to do things without really a solid reasoning, or because somebody is benefiting, but not because of a benefit for the whole population. So I think these are the things that I can do briefly. There are many more things to talk about, in particular from this dialogue or well, sometimes not dialogue between the scientific realm and the policy realm, but I think maybe it's what I can say in this first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Macera. And before we go on to the final speaker, which will be John himself, I'll just act as a little bridge there between what Dr. Macera was saying and onto John. Just in being aware of the problem, I guess, from the abstract point of view, aware of the problem and distinction between literally between distraction and what I see as attention or intention. And I think already Dr. Macera was alluding to that very much in this problem of denial. We live in times of great distraction, and these really are paradoxical times. Distraction, remember, we think of the etymology of the word distractus from the Latin, to draw away. Traere is to draw, and dis is to draw away from something. And on the one hand, we have the possibility of more information than ever before, and that's a possibility literally at our fingertips. And yet so many of us, the way we live, the actions or inactions of politicians, as Dr. Macera already mentioned, motivated sometimes oftentimes by political or economic motivations, world leaders, society, and regular people continuing to distract themselves. A case in point is the environmental crisis all over the world during the last 30 years, which has become very much apparent, and the slowness in which we are reacting as many incompetent leaders decide for us. So how do we overturn or literally this distraction from our iPhones, our TV series, off overload of information, and this constant immediacy of social media where everyone is a star, and thereby transform our society and ourselves into focus, attention, and intention? So if we can move and think about, at least, this really is the idea that to go away from distraction. And of course, the extreme version of that is denial. But most of us are living in this distraction into attention. And attention, again, another Latin word, literally to stretch towards, tendere is stretching towards. And that is really something that generates energy. To be attentive to something will generate energy. And then intention, again, another Latin word, is stretching out. Okay, it's literally a stretching out, directing one's attention, paying attention, i.e. focus, and that creates transformation. So these are the things that we really want to try to have an impact or influence and communicate with the world, especially in Malawi also, and becoming attentive into the use of masks during this pandemic. Often people are bored, unaware, indifferent, and if they lose this distraction and become attentive or intentive to the increasing sickness and death everywhere and the effects that the mask can do and how it can use. And I'll conclude before I move on to John, just to bring in the kind of as an inspirational guide, just 3 different quotes from 3 different people, a scientist, a poet, and a religious writer. And the scientist Einstein made the statement that we have a choice. We either see everything and live our lives as a miracle or nothing as a miracle. And that's really the focus there, is that we have this choice to either really go for it and think of life as a miracle and to literally, and that goes towards the focus. And the second quote is from Irish poet James Joyce, who said, though his heart, soul and spirit turns to Pharaoh times, his love, faith and hope stick to futurism. And so we have that again, that combination of the ancient and the spirit, the soul and the spirit of the ancient times, learning from the ancient times, the Pharaoh times, and then propelling ourselves forward to the future in actually maintaining these 3 great aspects that we've learned from Christianity: love, faith, and hope in community. And the third then is from Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, who says, what is joyful or to be joyful? It is truly to be present to oneself, to be today attentive to the present time. So to be focused and to be present is a key to actual joyfulness. So these are the 3 to think about. So I'll pass over to John O'Connor, which you all know, who was the co-founder of the Hestian project, stoves that are reducing greenhouse emissions because they burn much less wood. And he, as I said before, is working for the Mask for All Malawi campaign over the last month. So over to you, John.
Many thanks, Barry. And thanks to Doctors Macera, Matoga, and Bandawe. Maybe just to say about masks and the Mask for All Malawi campaign, that was formed just under 4 weeks ago now as a grassroots community-led drive by Malawians to help Malawians to bring made in Malawi masks to all Malawians in furtherance of the policy that Dr. Bandawe enunciated and explained the origin of, a policy that was itself formulated by Malawians for Malawians. So the campaign now is entirely staffed by volunteers in Malawi and across 6 continents. It's financed entirely by private donations. And as of today, it has reached a daily production rate of 100,000 community sewn masks every day, that being 700,000 a week and climbing. And we're aiming for about 2 million a week, which we should reach in about 3 weeks. So yeah, it's moving in the right direction. It's a difficult challenge. There are 19 million people to be reached, and they need to be reached quicker than this virus reaches them. Dr. Matoga talked about the epidemiological side of this campaign, and indeed what's happening in Malawi, and just the epidemiological side of the campaign itself will involve splitting the now limited resources between, firstly, 1 single district of the 28 districts in Malawi, and then the rest, the remaining 50%, across the other 27 districts. So what we will do there is we will try to reach a full saturation in that 1 district, which is a population of 1.2 million. And what we will try and do there is achieve total saturation with a view to following up with an epidemiological study on that district to show proof of concept here. So similar to what the Slovakians have done, to try to establish a testing system that can show or attempt to show that what we're doing is working. So I think almost everyone has mentioned distraction in one form or another. I think it is probably the word of this century. It is my greatest concern, much more than this virus. The virus isn't a very intelligent creature. It's a very stupid creature. and I think easily avoided by a comprehensive overall approach within which wearing masks universally is a vital part. And I think that Dr. Bandawi spoke and showed we showed on the screen there what appear to be the effects on the death rates in the countries that are applying universal mask usage. That list of countries was joined a couple of days ago by Senegal and will be joined on Monday by Germany. So there is quite a lot of hope there, because most recently, as Germany goes, so goes Europe. Now, the United States joined that list 2 weeks ago in the form of an attempt at voluntary universal mask usage, where the CDC reversed its prior guidance and advised that all citizens of the United States who go outside should do so wearing a homemade mask. Just again on the subject of distraction, I was privileged to be invited to a very lengthy meeting on Zoom just a few days ago, involving very senior, let's say, academics and development people focused on Malawi, and indeed involving some government people quite senior too. That meeting lasted 2.5 hours, and masks were not mentioned once during that meeting, other than in the form of a eulogy or accolade for, I think the guy's name is Jack Ma, who I believe over a month ago deposited 100,000 masks into Malawi. So as PPE, of course, not as community masks. So I'll try and call all of that distraction. And I think it feels like that a strategy for focus is probably the paramount need for us all to get, and I'm sure we do desire to get, our lives back. The suggestion there is, if you do want your life back, you won't get it entirely back before there's universal vaccination, but you can get pretty close, Hong Kong style, and anyone can look at the videos in Hong Kong of people going about their normal lives at the same traditional density in the streets that we're used to seeing in Hong Kong. So that too can come your way, but I guess it needs the distraction to be turned to attention and the attention to be turned to a strategy. I guess the final idea here is to harness the Masks for All Malawi model and teach it to the neighboring countries of Malawi, and indeed the other 55 countries on the African continent. 1 or 2 of them, as I said, have adopted it already: Morocco, Senegal, and Kenya. So that leaves us with 53 countries in Africa that I'm aware of that could be minded to follow a similar approach. And the approach, of course, is that the African people themselves make masks for themselves and achieve the Passover that Barry described. So Barry, I'll just ask you to take it from there.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, I don't know how we want to go about this. It's 5 to 2 now, and there's been a few questions also in the chat there as well that some are being answered to. And I guess what's really important from this meeting, and it's wonderful to have Dr. Bandawi and Dr. Bandawi, Dr. Matoga, and Dr. Masera all here together, giving very much 3 crucial pieces of information for us. It's just how to connect and generate focus and strategize that focus and connect with, I guess, influencers around the world to making masks part of and crucial to the combating of the pandemic. So I don't know, John, how you want to proceed for the next few minutes. If there's someone that would like to add to some of the speakers' comments and discussions and insights. I guess we still have a bit of time for that. If someone would like to also say a few words. I don't know, John, how do you feel about that?
Yes, please, Barry. That sounds great. Andrew Revkin always has a cutting insight into anything I've ever discussed with him. Andrew, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
This is very valuable. There are a couple of things I want to bring up. One is, of course, in many developing countries, the key pressure that's evolving almost faster than the virus is food insecurity related to social pressures to lock down. Obviously, in rural areas, there won't be lockdown like there is in India, but I think a key communication. Oh, what's the word I want? It's important to kind of consider that and how this plays out, because that might be the dominant local story. The other thing, of course, because several people on this line are focused on cooking smoke, I haven't yet seen, and I would like to know if any of the epidemiologists, either here or in other areas with biomass cooking still being predominant, are examining how that relates to risk models. If you have high exposure to PM 2.5 and this virus is spreading, is that integrated? I bet you that's not in the Imperial College model, but maybe it is. So is anybody assessing that? Third, the thing I can bring here is communication capacity. I just launched a webcast a month ago, and every 2 or 3 days I've been doing these on aspects of the coronavirus pandemic, including with citizen team in Bhopal, India, where I had a live discussion with them on the ground as they were working on and describing their efforts to do food distribution to the informal settlements in Bhopal, where the lockdown in India has really created this food crisis. I could do that in Malawi. It can be phone for those who can't have the internet access, but it would be interesting to have 2 or 3 perspectives live at the same time. One of you who's in epidemiology or public health, and maybe someone working in one of these areas where there is the sewing of the masks underway. And we could build a pretty good webcast that could convey this to the broader global public. So those are some things: food insecurity, the secondary risk related to high PM 2.5 levels. Is that integrated yet in any of the models? And that's a story to me as well. And then 3, let's get a webcast going.
Andrew, if I can just add to that, that I just had a look at a Lancet article, which is predicting that the effect, or suggesting stroke modeling, that the effect, the load factor that the COVID virus is going to have on existing health systems, and they've modeled various scenarios, but in every scenario it looks like it's going to be quite diabolical in terms of additional deaths from non-COVID factors.
Oh yeah, for sure, that's a huge that's a huge issue. That
so,
also
and right, the numbers coming out there are well, terrifying to some, ominous to others.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew. Is there anyone else that would like to contribute or to make a comment or would like to say something?
Yeah, just to comment on the issue concerning the lockdown that Andrew brought up.
Could you say who's that speaking there?
Mitch.
Oh, hi, Mitch. Okay.
Yeah. Malawi was supposed to go into a lockdown about a week ago, but then human rights organizations actually came together and contested that in court. So it was actually stopped. But their basis of argument was food security, and the same thing that Andrew brought up. And as I show in my as you saw in my presentation, 85% of the population rural and 50% live below the poverty line, so the concern was that if we put people into lockdown for 3 weeks, they're actually going to die of hunger and not of COVID.
Right. Which makes the masks all the more important.
If I may, just to add to Mitch's comment, there was a coalition of human rights organizations that sought and obtained an injunction against the lockdown. It also just comes as part of a general atmosphere of skepticism and distrust about of the authorities, basically, and the fact that many people feel that it was the idea of a lockdown is ill-considered, and that there's we are also in an election year. So there are a lot of these factors. A lot of the distraction factor is quite massive here in this context. So I just wanted to add that to be thinking about as we move forward too.
Who was just speaking?
This is Gama Bandawi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Andy here one more time. I can't stay on very long, but Gama, I would love to follow up with you on the idea and with John and others of doing a broadcast about some of this, and we can get into some of those complexities you mentioned.
Yeah, super. I'd be very keen as well.
This is Ellie. I just have a comment to contribute. Just so that everyone is aware, we're also starting a campaign in parallel to this in the States. So we're trying to reach out to a broader audience there. And so we have a team there working on a parallel fundraising campaign, and hopefully that will generate quick funds for us and to get to Malawi as soon as possible. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you, Ellie. And I know people have to go. We could also think about maybe resuming having another discussion or get together soon if people think that would be useful, and to continue collaboration and swapping ideas. This is just a kind of a beginning point for the Lemonade group to at least to be aware of each other's presence and to see what skills each person has. I don't know how people feel about that. Maybe if people are up for having another meeting together.
Andy here. I'm certainly up for it. And by the way, I think I could do one of these broadcasts as soon as the first week of May. So not this coming week, but the week after it. We could settle on a time that works for the local time zone, that works for the U.S. Generally, like midday here would be evening in it depends on where you are in Africa, but and then catch the west coast of the United States as well. And we could just settle on a day in that first or second week of May would be doable. And that's a way to broaden the discussion. I can, they go live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And it's a way to attract other expertise and other partners.
That would be great, Andrew. Where are you based exactly?
In New York.
New York, okay.
So Andrew's in the Earth Institute at Columbia. I think that's right, Andrew, isn't it?
Yep.
And formerly a correspondent with the New York Times for environment matters.
That's correct. Be a massive help then.
I'm eager to help.
Okay, well, everyone has a direct contact with John, who's brought us all together. So I don't know, John, if you want to say a few words to conclude, just well, my own behalf, thanks to everyone for making yourself available and present to this, and to John for bringing us all together. His perseverance and energy has been extraordinary, and to Ellie, and to Ellie, who the two of them I think have been sleepless for the last month and a half. So, and thanks to the three speakers especially, also Dr. Bandawi, Dr. Matoga, and Dr. Macera, Malawi and Mexico, and to Andrew's contributions there at the end as well. I think it's been, for me at least, an eye-opener and a help to kind of get me off my own distraction and into focus, literally.